Hello, it's week 7 of season 6 of the Andy Griffith Show. This week's episode title is Off to Hollywood. Marty, what's going on this week?
Gooder comes in the courthouse to tell Andy that he can grease the squad car around 11 o'clock today. But Andy's not there, and so Warren tells Gooder to leave Andy a note. And while Gooder is at the desk writing the note, he notices a letter that came in today's mail for Andy from Del Knott Picture Studios in Hollywood. And they start holding it up to the light in the window to read it, but then Andy walks in.
Andy opens it. It's a check for $1,000 with a letter from the studio saying they want to buy the rights to the article named Sheriff Without a Gun that appeared in a national magazine last year.
And the studio wants to make a movie out of it. And Andy tells Warren and Gooder not to say anything. He wants to go home and tell Opie and Aunt Dee himself first. And after he does, Aunt Dee wants to call Clara and tell her, but Andy says no, let's just keep it to ourselves. And Andy wants to put the money in the bank, and Aunt Dee says we should spend at least some of it. And Andy says okay, we can celebrate. We'll have Helen over for supper with crab meat cocktail and chocolate ice cream.
And then when Andy goes back to work from lunch and he sees all these folks in the courthouse, they want to see the check. It turns out Goober did tell some people, and now everyone in town knows.
So Andy shows the check to them, and they all admire it. And then Goober sends everybody out except Floyd, and then he asks Andy what he's going to do with the money. He offers Andy a '58 convertible for $600 that he's got over at the filling station. And Andy says no, and then Goober leaves. And then Floyd wants to sell Andy 2 acres of swamp land for $300, and once again Andy says no. And then at supper that night, Helen says they should have some fun with the money. Maybe take a trip. And Aunt Dee says yeah, let's all go to Hollywood. And then she gets out all these travel brochures to Hollywood that she had already gotten.
So Andy reluctantly says okay. He doesn't feel good about taking Opie out of school and about leaving Rookie Warren in charge of the sheriff's office while they're gone.
And Aunt Dee says it'll all be okay. She's got a list made of things to do to get ready to leave. And then Andy finds all these folks in the courthouse again, looking at his Hollywood travel brochures. And they give him hotel recommendations. And then Gooder sends them all out except Floyd. And Gooder and Floyd stay and keep reading them, even though Andy says he's got a lot of work to do. And then later on the street, Floyd tells Warren, who's his nephew, that Andy is going to take a trip, and Warren's going to be left in charge.
So Warren goes in the courthouse and tells Andy he just heard the good news, and Andy wants to go over some things with him right away about how to take over the office while Andy is gone, but Warren is too busy telling Goober about his brother-in-law's time in Hollywood during the war.
And Aunt Dee has bought some silly matching red shirts and shorts for Andy and Opie for the trip. And then out on the sidewalk, Mrs. Larch wants Andy to call a second cousin that she has in Colorado while they're in California. And he says that's 3 states away. And then Mr. Jason, the suitcase returning, wants Andy to put in a word with some movie folks while he's there for his niece who plays xylophone and tap dances.
And after a while, he's got a list of 30 of these types of things and favors to do for folks while he's in Hollywood. And then Helen gives him a 31st thing to do for her landlord.
And then when the bus comes for them to go to the Raleigh airport, the town has a crowd there to say goodbye along with a band. And on the airplane, Andy finally starts to relax. But then he and Aunt Dee realize that they may not have turned the gas off at the house. So he asks the stewardess when the next stop is.
We'll see you next week for episode 8, which will be a continuation of this Hollywood trip theme. See you then.